I just watched The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1, which is half a movie about basically Katniss is now in District 13, which she previously thought was destroyed, and she's in like an underground rebel base, and they're planning some propaganda to put around the rest of Panem to get everyone to revolt against the capital. And that's it. I mean, it's very much half a movie. The decision to split the Mockingjay, the book, into two parts, and I've got the Mockingjay book here actually. I found it. Let's see how many pages it is. It's not very many pages. It's 441 pages, and it's not very small text. It's about the same as Catching Fire, actually. I've got Catching Fire over there. I think it's literally only a little bit longer. But so I don't think it jumps out to you as a book which you would split into two films. But of course, this came shortly after Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, which did it. I mean, I'll talk a bit about the history of splitting films into two. So Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 is probably the first one that you really think of, but that seems very much like it was a one-off thing. It was Quentin Tarantino shot like 5 hours of footage and was like, I don't want to cut any of this, and you can't cut any of it because so much happens in it. I mean, there's a lot, obviously long dialogue scenes if it's Tarantino, but it's kind of, there's a lot happens in Kill Bill. Every one of the 5 which is ticking off the list is a whole story in itself. Like if that's like an hour per story, pretty much, it's fair enough. Do it as two parts. And then Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. There's a lot of plot in the book. There's a lot to do. I think if every Harry Potter film is 2.5 hours long, I think they could possibly, maybe Warner Brothers would let them do it 3 hours, but even then you'd have to cut too much stuff. I mean, everyone always says, yeah, part one's really boring and like all this camping scenes, and actually if you watch the film, I think maybe a fifth of the runtime is the camping scenes, and the rest of it is actually a really good film. There's a lot of really great stuff there. Twilight literally did it. It was like a couple of years later, they were like, or like 1 year later, they were like, oh, let's do that for our last one, for Breaking Dawn, and that was just to get more money out of it, because nothing happens in Breaking Dawn is terrible, and the first part is a film at least. The second part is literally, it's like an hour long. I mean, it's just padded out with flashbacks from footage from previous films and earlier in those films. And there's like 3 credit scenes. So there's a credit scene at the start, and then the really long like end game style one with all the cast members. It looks all fancy, and then they do the rolling credits. So Infinity War as well was meant to be 2 parts, but then it turned into Infinity War and Endgame, and fair enough, that was the right decision. And then I've also seen Best F open brackets R close brackets ENs by Greg Sestero, which is 2 parts, and that, like, fair enough. You know what? That's a very amateur film. It wasn't very good, but it was also quite enjoyable. I didn't think it was boring, so fine. So this is, do I think it should be 2 parts or not? I haven't yet rewatched part 2, so I can't really judge, but nothing really happens in part 1, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It feels more like you're reading a book. Like, you know, you really get a chance to feel like you're there. Like, you know, you're in the moment, you're with the characters, you in their day-to-day life, and I think that's kind of good, because up until this point, the first 2 Hunger Games films are very rushed. Like, there's a lot of really good moments which they'd be good to spend more time in. We never get to know the other tributes when we should do, but just because there isn't enough runtime. And in fact, well, I was saying with my first Hunger Games review that how we should follow multiple tributes, not just Katniss and Peter. I think that would be good for this film as well. If we could see if we got to know the families of those other tributes from the other districts, then we'd actually have a connection to the other districts rebelling and how they receive the propaganda sent out by District 13, and like their conflicts of whether or not to rebel, whether it's worth it. Whereas instead we just see extras rebelling. So I think that'd be interesting. Like I said before, I think The Hunger Games would be so much better as a TV series. As 3 seasons, it would be so much better. There's just so much more depth you can do with it, and this feels like it's half a season of a TV show. This film, Mockingjay Part 1, it's pretty enjoyable but you need to watch part 2 right after, or like if it's a TV show, like a week or a few weeks after. The fact that this was released as a film and then you need to wait another year for part 2 is just, it's not satisfying enough. It doesn't give you your money's worth in the slightest. Whereas Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 has a third act. It has an arc with itself. Like, it's got the what are they called? The like dirty looking people who are the like Death Eaters. They're like homeless Death Eaters. Well, they're like chasing them throughout the whole thing, and they have to keep moving to make sure they don't get caught. And then at the end, it resolves that whole arc in the whole thing with in Malfoy Manor. And so although it's very much half of a larger story, it got its own start, middle, and end in its own right. And same with Kill Bill Volume 1. Like, it's very much got a narrative in itself. Whereas it's just half a film. There is no third act. It just, events happen and then it stops. And I mean, they try and do what they can for a third act. I mean, they choose a part of the book where, I mean, they couldn't have really picked a better part to do the end of this, but it's not a big enough deal. Like, it really isn't a big enough deal when you think of how exciting the previous two films are and how much of a climax there are. Like, this is just, it's not good enough. But I'll get onto some positives, some things I like, because there are some really good parts. I thought the hanging tree sequence is probably my favourite sequence of the whole series. I just think it's really powerful, and even though it's mainly sort of extras involved in it, I think it's kind of powerful stuff. If only we got to know some of the characters, but oh well. And there's like an attack that they need to hide, they need to kind of get into shelter from, I guess, which I think worked really well. And not the second one, not the first one. I think that was really good. That made me feel stressed. I thought Francis Lawrence did a really good job with that. It almost felt like a sensory overload. I thought, like, the alarms going off and all the panic and the music. I thought that was excellent. It almost felt like the climax of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, like that level of stress you feel, like the panic from the people and the way it's directed. I thought that was brilliant. And so there are some good moments. I think, unfortunately, Katniss and Jennifer Lawrence have gone back to being bad again. Not as bad as the first film, but I think Katniss is written fine in this one. I think it's just Jennifer Lawrence. The cast is absolutely exceptional. I mean, Donald Sutherland is great again. Philip Seymour Hoffman's great. Josh Hutcherson actually is pretty good in this one, whereas he kind of never stood out particularly in the others. The whole main three never did. But no, I think Jennifer Lawrence's performance is pretty bad. I just don't buy her when she's doing her first proper, and it's meant to be she's presenting it badly. It's meant to be like, this wouldn't inspire anyone. I feel like her acting isn't that different to when she's doing it normally. And she's won an Oscar, and she's been nominated 3 other times. But she should be one of the best actors in the world looking at that. But I don't think she's good at all. Anyway, yeah, Gale's terrible still. It's not like there's nothing to him, and so I just feel ambivalent to him. Like, there's nothing to him, but I hate him. He's just the most bland guy ever. Considering, I mean, there's no Hunger Games in this film. In fact, I think they only mentioned the Hunger Games maybe twice. I respect how they didn't just do the same thing again. Like, they're trying to do a new thing. And I think I like that a lot, sequels, where they're a new film, they're in this own thing in its own right. It's not just the same thing again. But this film is just about sort of making propaganda films, and it's about the Capitol's media they distribute and the District 13's media. But so I think they could have done some really good social commentaries on media and how it influences us or misinforms us. But I don't feel like they did anything of substance. I don't think there was any social commentary. I think they wasted every opportunity with that, really. So yeah, overall, I think the film is it's enjoyable, but I don't think it deserves 4 stars because it's just not a film. It's half a film. I know it's part 1, but it should be, if it's been released in the cinema for the same price tickets, which it would have been. This film it's just a 3 star. It's fine. It's pretty enjoyable, but it's not a film.